every passing week, not because the surgery had damaged it, but because I was living inside a version of my life that someone else was actively editing without my knowledge. I started writing things down obsessively, times, places, conversations, not because I distrusted my memory exactly, but because I needed some record that existed outside the version of events other people kept describing back to me. By July, I had lost roughly 6 weeks of clarity about my own life. I would learn later, piece by piece, that in that time Dana had attended 2 of my work events as me, had video called my aunt overseas and let her believe she was speaking to me, had gone to dinner with Ryan's parents in my place while I was, in reality, asleep at home recovering from a low-grade infection near my surgical site that left me weak and disoriented for nearly 2 weeks. The infection alone should have been the moment someone noticed the gap between the version of me moving through the world and the version of me actually struggling to get off the couch. But Dana had filled that gap so completely that my real absence simply blended into the noise of a normal, busy life. Ryan mentioned afterward, once we'd pieced things together, that I had seemed unusually energetic at his parents' dinner that night, laughing easily, asking his mother detailed questions about her garden that the real me, exhausted and running a low fever 12 miles away, could never have asked. Nobody had checked on me during that stretch, because as far as everyone else was concerned, I was out and about, living normally, recovering well. Dana had made herself so convincingly present as me that my actual absence went unnoticed. I finally confronted her properly in late July, sitting in my kitchen, asking her point blank how many times she had pretended to be me without my knowledge or consent. She didn't apologize. She said something that has stayed with me since, that she had spent her whole life living in my shadow, and for a few months, she finally understood what it felt like to be looked at the way people looked at me. She said it like a confession and a justification in the same breath, like the unfairness of her childhood had earned her the right to steal mine as an adult. I asked her to stop. She said she would. She did not. August brought the moment I now think of as the real turning point, though it didn't feel dramatic at the time. It felt small and strange, the way most true betrayals do before you understand their size. Jenna called me, hesitant, asking if everything was okay between me and Ryan, because Dana had mentioned to her, in passing, that Ryan and I were taking a break. I had no idea what she was talking about. I called Ryan immediately. He was quiet for a long moment before admitting that Dana had been the one telling him I needed space, that I'd said I was overwhelmed and wanted distance while I figured some things out. I had said no such thing. I had never said anything close to it. Ryan and I sat down and slowly, painfully, reconstructed weeks of miscommunication that Dana had engineered between us without either of us noticing the pattern until it was laid out plainly. She had told him I wanted space. She had told me, in vague terms, that he seemed distracted lately, planting a small doubt she never let grow into a direct accusation, just enough to keep me quietly uneasy without giving me anything concrete to confront him about. She had been managing both of us separately, feeding each of us just enough discomfort to keep us slightly apart, while she filled the gap between us with herself, present, helpful, endlessly available in a way that started to look, from the outside, like she was simply the more stable twin. I want to say I confronted her immediately and decisively, but the truth is messier. I spent the better part of September in a low, exhausting fog, trying to determine how much of what I remembered was accurate and how much I had gaslit myself into doubting. Carol, when I brought concerns to her, dismissed them almost instantly, saying Dana had just given up a kidney's worth of health for her sister and deserved gratitude, not suspicion. She said I was being ungrateful, that recovery made people paranoid, that I should focus on healing, instead of creating problems with the sister who saved my life. I left that conversation feeling like the villain in a story where I was very clearly the one who'd been erased. What made that conversation with Carol so disorienting wasn't just her dismissal, it was how quickly and completely she reached for the version of events that required nothing from her. Believing me would have meant admitting that one of her daughters had done something genuinely cruel to the other, and possibly asking what role her own parenting had played in creating a daughter capable of it. Believing Dana instead, framing my concerns as post-surgery paranoia, cost her nothing. I understood, even in the moment, that I wasn't really arguing with Carol about facts. I was arguing with 30 years of a family habit that had always found it easier to smooth over Dana's behavior than to examine it honestly, and I was, for the first time, refusing to let that habit swallow something this serious. The proof I needed came from an unlikely place. Mr. Whitfield's assistant, a meticulous woman named Priya, mentioned to me casually that I had submitted a project proposal in June that used language and formatting I never used, referencing software I'd never learned. I asked to see it. The email had come from my account, sent from a device I didn't recognize, at a time I could prove, through my phone's location history, that I was at a doctor's follow-up appointment, miles away, completely unable to have sent it. It was the first piece of hard, undeniable evidence, something outside of memory or feeling, something Dana couldn't talk her way around with warmth and plausible explanations. I gathered more after that, carefully, quietly, the way you gather things when you've learned the hard way that being right isn't enough if you can't prove it. Text messages sent from my number while my phone was, provably, in my own hand elsewhere. A voicemail Dana left for Ryan's mother, accidentally, in her own voice, forgetting for a moment to soften her tone into the version she used when pretending to be me. A charge on my card for a hair appointment at a salon I'd never visited, on a day my medical records confirmed I was at a follow-up scan across town. I pulled my phone's location history for the entire stretch, cross-referencing it against every strange story Ryan or Jenna or Mr. Whitfield had recounted, and slowly built a timeline that left no real room for interpretation. There were nights I could prove I was home in bed, medically documented and unreachable, while somewhere across town, someone using my name was living a version of my evening I had never agreed to. I remember sitting at my kitchen table at 2 a.m, spreading printed emails and screenshots across the surface like evidence in a case I never wanted to build against my own sister, and feeling a strange, hollow grief settle over the anger. It wasn't just that Dana had lied. It was that she had done it so carefully, so patiently, clearly planning each substitution in advance rather than improvising in a moment of temptation. This hadn't been one impulsive afternoon of pretending. It had been a sustained, deliberate campaign, stretched across months, executed with a level of preparation that told me she had thought about doing something like this long before my surgery ever gave her the opportunity. Piece by piece, the shape of what she'd done stopped being a feeling I couldn't justify and became a case I could actually present. I chose to confront her at Carol's house on a Sunday, with Ryan and Jenna both there, because I no longer trusted a private conversation to hold its shape once Dana got to reframe it in her own words afterward. I laid out the evidence calmly, the emails, the location records, the voicemail, one piece after another, watching her expression shift from practiced innocence to something colder as she realized there was no version of charm that would talk her out of this one. Carol went pale. Ryan looked physically sick, replaying, I could tell, every strange interaction from the past 6 months with new and horrible clarity. Dana's response was not an apology. It was an accusation, aimed at me, that I had always had it easier, that she deserved a chance to feel what my life felt like, that giving her a kidney didn't make me a saint, and taking a few months of my identity didn't make her a monster. She said it with more conviction than guilt, like she'd rehearsed the justification long before she needed it. Carol, to my genuine shock, did not immediately defend me. She sat there, silent, torn between 2 daughters, unable in that moment to fully choose either one, which told me everything I needed to know about how long this imbalance had quietly existed, long before the surgery gave it a shape. Ryan chose me, without hesitation, in a way that mattered more than I expected it to. He told Dana, calmly and clearly, that impersonating me to manage his emotion. His trust, his sense of what was happening in our relationship, was not something he could forgive or explain away as sisterly closeness. Jenna, quieter but firm, said she felt sick knowing she'd spent months talking to Dana believing it was me, sharing things she never would have shared with Dana directly. The room, for the first time since March, finally saw Dana the way I had been forced to see her for months, not as the sister who'd been generous with her time during my recovery, but as someone who had used my weakest months as an opportunity. Dana tried, briefly, to shift the conversation toward my own supposed failings, reaching back years to old arguments, old slights, anything that might dilute the weight of what she'd actually done. Nobody in that room let her. Ryan pointed out, calmly, that whatever old grievances existed between two sisters, none of them justified pretending to be one twin in order to manage the other twin's relationship without consent. Carol, finally, quietly, asked Dana whether she understood the difference between resenting a sister's life and actually taking it from her while she was too weak from surgery to notice. Dana didn't answer. She sat there, arms crossed, looking, for the first time in the entire ordeal, genuinely unsure of herself. I left Carol's house that evening feeling strange, lighter in some ways and heavier in others, the way you feel after finally saying out loud something you've been carrying silently for months. Ryan drove me home without saying much, and when we got inside, he simply held me for a long time before either of us said anything at all. I remember feeling, for the first time since the surgery, like I existed clearly again, undiluted by anyone else's version of me. It wasn't relief exactly. It was closer to arriving somewhere after a very long, disorienting drive and recognizing, finally, that you were back on solid ground. The weeks after the confrontation were not clean or cinematic. Dana did not disappear dramatically from my life.
Indeed.
She retreated instead, sullen, occasionally still trying to explain herself to Carol in ways that painted me as cold and unforgiving. Mr. Whitfield, once I explained the situation with the evidence I'd gathered, was horrified, both on my behalf and on behalf of the company, given that Dana had effectively been performing work under my identity for months. There were real, practical consequences to untangle, contracts she'd signed as me, client relationships she'd managed under my name. A handful of decisions made on accounts I was responsible for that I now had to review line by line to make sure nothing had been damaged or misrepresented while I wasn't the one actually making the calls. It was tedious, humiliating work, going through my own professional history looking for the fingerprints of someone else pretending to be me, but Mr. Whitfield stayed patient through all of it, treating me the entire time like the person who had been wronged rather than the source of some embarrassing internal mess. He helped me correct my employment records and quietly ensured Dana would never be allowed back into that building, going so far as to update the front desk with her photo so security would recognize her on site. A precaution that felt excessive until I remembered how easily she'd walked through that same lobby for months without anyone questioning her. It was a small, practical victory, but it mattered because it was the first place where the truth was simply accepted without me having to fight for it. Priya, the assistant who had first flagged the strange proposal, apologized repeatedly for not catching it sooner, though I told her honestly that there was nothing to catch. That Dana had been convincing precisely because she looked and sounded exactly like someone who was supposed to be there. Rebuilding trust with Ryan took longer than I expected, not because he doubted me, but because we both had to relearn which memories from that stretch of months actually belonged to us as a couple, and which had been quietly manufactured by someone standing in for me. We went through old messages together, sorting real conversations from the ones Dana had faked, and it was strange and a little grieving, realizing how much of a season of our relationship had been built on a version of me that wasn't actually present. There was one exercise Ryan suggested, half joking at first, that ended up mattering more than either of us expected. We sat down one evening with a calendar and went through the entire stretch of months, week by week, and for each one, he would tell me what he remembered happening between us, and I would tell him whether I had actually been present for it or whether it had likely been Dana. It was slow and strange and occasionally very painful, especially the weeks where he described feeling closer to me than usual, only for us to realize together that those particular closeness had been manufactured by someone who was not, in fact, me. But by the end of it, we had something we hadn't had in months, an honest, shared map of what our relationship actually was, stripped of the parts that had been counterfeit. We chose, eventually, to treat that period almost like a fog we'd both walked through, and to focus instead on rebuilding the parts that were unmistakably, provably real. Carol and I are still working through what happened, in the slow, imperfect way families do when nobody involved is entirely a villain or entirely innocent. She has admitted, quietly, that she spent our childhood praising Dana's efforts so loudly because she worried what it meant about her own parenting that one daughter needed so much more encouragement than the other. She has admitted that this dynamic did not begin with the transplant, only accelerated because of it. I don't know if Dana and I will ever have a relationship again in any recognizable form. I know that I finally stopped feeling guilty for protecting the one thing she almost successfully took from me completely, which was simply the right to be believed as myself. It has been almost a year now since that Sunday at Carol's house, and I would be lying if I said the aftermath resolved itself neatly. Dana moved 2 states away not long after, taking a job through a distant cousin, and our contact since then has been sparse, a handful of stilted messages around holidays, nothing resembling the closeness we once had. Carol still calls both of us regularly, still occasionally tries to gently suggest that enough time has passed, that family should find a way back to each other. I have told her, as kindly as I can manage, that forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing, and that I am willing to consider one without rushing myself toward the other. Ryan and I got married in the spring, in a small ceremony that Dana was not invited to, a decision that still occasionally draws a disappointed sigh from Carol, but one I have never once regretted. Standing there, surrounded by people who had watched the entire ordeal unfold and stayed anyway, I felt something settle in me that I hadn't fully realized was still unsettled. Jenna gave a toast that mentioned, lightly, how glad she was to finally know, with total certainty, which twin she was talking to. It got a laugh from the room. It also, quietly, meant more to me than almost anything else said that day. My relationship with my own body changed too, in ways I didn't expect. For months after the surgery, I associated the scar on my side with generosity, with the version of myself who gave without hesitation. For a while, after everything with Dana came out, I associated it instead with vulnerability, with the exact window of weakness she had exploited so precisely. It has taken time to return to something like the original meaning, to see the scar simply as proof that I once loved someone enough to give her an organ, regardless of what she did afterward with the time that gift bought her. That generosity was never the mistake. The mistake was assuming it would be met with anything resembling the same honesty. I think about the kidney sometimes, oddly, more than I think about the months of impersonation. I gave her an organ willingly, without hesitation, because that is what you do for someone you love. What I did not sign up for was the quiet, patient theft that followed, the slow replacement of my name, my job, my relationship, piece by piece, while I was too physically depleted to notice the scale of what was happening. I survived the surgery easily. Surviving the aftermath took considerably longer and required something no operation could give me, which was the evidence, finally, undeniable, that the life being lived in my name was never actually mine to begin with, until I took it back. If there is one thing I would tell anyone standing where I once stood, weak, recovering, trusting the people closest to them without question, it is this: generosity is never the problem. The problem is mistaking someone's gratitude for your gift as proof that they will never try to take more than you offered. Watch closely, even when you are tired, even when you are healing, even when the person doing the taking shares your own face. Especially